Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about how your brain measures the passage of time. Everybody knows time is subjective. Sometimes it goes by so quickly. Like if you're in a rock concert and your favorite artist is playing your favorite song from your favorite album, and sometimes it just drags on. Like when that same guy starts playing some crap from his new album that you just wish it would be over so you could get back to those old songs that you love. Why is that? What's going on in your brain that allows for that? So today I'm going to talk about how one part of the brain considers time like an Ouroboros, and another part of the brain considers time like a river. I'm going to talk about which brain cells in particular are responsible for measuring time, and I'm going to tell you about a unique timekeeping protein. So first of all, what is an Ouroboros? A lot of you have probably seen it, if not all of you. Even if you don't know what it is when I'm mentioning it, it's that image, that symbol of the snake eating its own tail. Some people, instead of a snake eating its own tail, some cultures did a dragon eating its own tail. But typically, it symbolizes the same thing, sort of a unification of the beginning and the end. Time is sometimes considered like that, an endless cycle, like the Big Bang. Bang, the universe expands, the universe contracts, and then suddenly it's a cycle that happens all over again, and we're just part of that cycle. And what part of your brain consider things like that? Well, one of them is the circadian rhythm. It's the rhythm that our brain and our body keep that's similar in the span to the Earth spinning on its axis, a 24-hour day. That would be like you eat a certain number of times a day, you sleep, you get tired, things like that. It's not the only cycle in our body, though. We have the monthly rhythm, which is the lunar cycle, such as the menstrual cycle. And there are other timekeeping cycles, circadian rhythms, circumlunar rhythms in our body and our brain. So in our brain, the area that keeps that time, the circadian rhythm, is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's about the size of a grain of rice. And it sits within your hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a marble-sized area of the brain very close to the center. And you could almost think of it as the Goldilocks of the brain and the Goldilocks of your whole body, because it keeps things in what's called homeostasis. If your body is hot, it organizes a bunch of mechanisms to cool your body down. If you are getting dehydrated, it organizes a number of things that make you feel thirsty. It makes you feel sleepy when your body and brain get too overheated and need a rest and things like that. Another way that our brain and we consider time is like a river. But before I tell you about time as a river, I'd like to tell you about how I like to pass my time. In addition to other things, I enjoy reading. So I would recommend you also read. And if you're going to read, why not read a great book? So Azazel's Public House is a great book. But don't take my word for it. I'm going to read you what Tom, or part of what Tom wrote on Amazon about the book. He called it riveting, haunting, exciting, scary. This book has it all. Azazel's Public House was a thrilling and exciting read. This was a book I could not put down! Exclamation point. The characters were haunting, some you will love, some you'll find despicable, all making for an outstanding thriller. Pete's evil spirit had me on the edge of my seat the whole time. So who wouldn't want to read that book? So I highly encourage you. I'll put it down in the description. You can click on the link and please buy the book. And if you like it, please write more Amazon reviews. I really would appreciate it. So let's get back to time. So time can also be considered a river. A river begins and ends. It begins with a trickle somewhere up in the hills. It winds its unique course, either short or long, either beautiful or desolate. And it ends when the river empties into the sea. Time can be considered as having a beginning and an end. Birth, death. Our birth, our death, Earth's beginning, Earth's destruction, all of these things will happen. There is an importance to the brain being able to account for time in this way. Why is that? Because we have to make long-range plans. And the only way to make long-range plans is to be able to understand things beyond a cycle, beyond the circadian rhythm. For example, if you have to plan something that goes on for many years, getting a degree in order to get a better job, or saving up money to afford that house that you want to put a down payment on. So what part of the brain accounts for that? It's actually a part of your temporal lobe. In the middle part of the temporal lobe, there's something called the entorhinal cortex. The entorhinal cortex is intimately associated with the hippocampus, and it's that part of the brain that's able to mark linear time. How do we know that? We know that from some ingenious experiments. Certain of these experiments were done on the classic, rodents running a maze. So while the rodents were running the maze, they were trained to stop for exactly 6 seconds. So they had to mark in their brains exactly 6 seconds, and the scientists determined that this occurred in the entorhinal cortical hippocampal region. But it's not just rodents. This actually occurred in human epilepsy patients too. Why epilepsy patients? The reason why is that scientists sometimes, when they're trying to locate where an epileptic seizure starts, they'll put electrodes into the brain. And those electrodes into the brain are designed to record the area of where a seizure starts with a burst of electrical activity. But some of these patients that need the electrodes in their brain volunteer to participate in other experiments. And one such experiment was to mark off 10 seconds, maybe by counting 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, however they wanted to do it. So as they marked off those 10 seconds, the electrode showed a slow ramping up in the entorhinal cortex. And then when the 10 seconds was marked, it had a spike in the hippocampus, which corresponded to the recording of a memory of that 10 seconds. You may ask, and I may ask, why would you need 2 separate parts of the brain to mark time, or why are they so different? The reason may be that the circadian rhythm is needed for all creatures, even super primitive creatures. So that's done in the hypothalamic suprachiasmatic nucleus region, which is part of the reptilian brain. That's the oldest of the 3 brains that are in your head. And if you want to understand the idea and the concept of 3 brains versus a unified brain in your head, I'll link to something in the description as well. So the reptilian brain is important to get this circadian rhythm because all of the creatures need to know I sleep at the right time, I wake at the right time, I eat at the right time, I mate at the right time, mate in the right season. Whereas only the more evolved creatures engage in long-range planning. So therefore, the linear time is marked in a more evolutionarily advanced part of the brain, which is the neocortex and limbic system, somewhere on the juncture of those two, where the hippocampus is in the limbic system and the entorhinal cortex is one of the more primitive parts of the neocortex. So I also wanted to discuss which brain cells keep time. So in order to understand that, you should understand that there are four types of brain cells. One are called the neurons. That's the thinking part of the brain, the gray matter of your brain. Another brain cell is the microglia. The microglia hang out, they're little cells that hang out in the brain, and they do very little until they get angry. What makes them angry? Some inflammatory or traumatic event, and then they become active, and they act very much like immune cells in the other part of the body. The third type of cell in the brain is called oligodendrocytes. And those cells wrap around the axons of the neuron. They wrap them around with myelin, which is like fat. So what they're doing is they're insulating the wiring of the brain so that there's not that much electric leakage. And the last type of the cell, last type of cell in the brain, the fourth, is astrocytes. They're considered nurse cells, support cells. They keep the other cells healthy. They support the other cells, especially the neurons. They also maintain the barrier between the brain and the rest of the body. So you would think, and most of us thought, that the timekeeping function is going to be done by the neurons, which are the thinking part of the brain, not the servant astrocytes, which are just there to support the other cells. British scientists turned this thinking on its head in 2019. So they took a bunch of mice and they shut down the neurons in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's the part of the brain that marks the circadian rhythm, the 24-hour cycle. And they found that even when they shut down the neurons, the mice were able to keep a circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm was 23 hours a day instead of 24 hours a day. But it was a true circadian rhythm that went on day after day. And what they found is that even in the absence of the neurons, the axons were able to do the job. So an interesting new finding that turns what had been settled science, that the neurons are making all the decisions and the astrocytes are just there to support them, turned it on its head. And the last thing I wanted to discuss was a protein. There's a protein in the brain that we've discovered that actually keeps the time. The protein in the brain that keeps the time is called a pigment dispersing factor, PDF. So the PDF was discovered to keep time in fruit flies. Now you might say, fruit flies, so what? Like a fruit fly brain is the size of a poppy seed and it has 100,000 neurons. Our brain fills up everything between our ears and has 86 billion neurons. So what if the PDF helps the fruit fly keep time? But another set of scientists showed that the PDF protein was involved in the pathway of the human circadian rhythm too. So why does this matter to us? Why does this matter to you and I? Well, the circadian rhythm disorders are an important problem that doctors try to solve. If the circadian rhythm gets totally out of whack, people don't eat at the right time, they don't sleep at the right time, and it's a big problem. And also something along the lines of linear time is we all feel bored for at some time. Sometimes we try to wish our time away. Maybe an understanding of this will help us be in the moment and enjoy the ride. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you will consider liking it and sharing it with your friends, and I certainly hope you'll consider buying my book.